Okay, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be unpacking Dr. Kapileswar Mishra's brilliant, incredibly factual analysis of India's school system. He recently took a deep dive into the NITI Aayog's latest 10-year comprehensive audit, covering 2014 to 2024, and honestly, the numbers are just staggering. If you care at all about where India's future workforce is heading, this is absolutely the data you need to hear.
Dr. Mishra opens with this really powerful framing. He says the challenge is no longer whether a child can reach a school, but whether the school, once reached, can reach the child. It sets our stage perfectly, right? It acknowledges that India has largely solved the sheer physical challenge of building infrastructure. The concrete has been poured, the schools exist, but the true, highly complex challenge now lies entirely inside the classroom.
And first, we absolutely have to recognize the monumental scale of that access. India is running the largest school system on Earth. We're talking 14.71 lakh schools and 24.69 crore students. Just getting these kids into a system is a logistical achievement that's roughly equivalent to putting the entire population of Brazil into a classroom every single day.
And the concrete progress is completely undeniable. Today, electricity reaches nearly 92% of Indian schools. Think about that for a second. That is a massive, tangible leap from just under 56% a decade ago. So the physical access barrier, we've largely dismantled it.
But here is the paradox we really need to unpack today. Despite this incredible infrastructure boom, total student enrollment has actually fallen every single year since 2021. Now, the NITI Aayog audit attributes part of this to a shrinking school-age cohort as fertility rates drop and, to much better data tracking that eliminates double counting. But as Dr. Mishra rightly notes, we cannot let those totally valid reasons obscure a massive, genuine shift in where and for how long a child is actually being educated.
Which brings us to our first major diagnostic, where the system leaks. We can think of this as the transition cliff.
Just look at this sheer drop-off. Participation is nearly universal through primary and upper primary. We're talking over 90%. But notice the transition to secondary. It drops to about 79%. And then higher secondary plummets all the way down to 58.4%. In plain terms, nearly 4 in 10 teenagers who should be in higher secondary classrooms are entirely missing. It's literally a cliff.
So what's the main culprit behind this drop? It boils down to this tiny, tiny number, 5.4%. That is the fraction of Indian schools that actually offer an unbroken grade 1 to 12 pathway on a single campus. That means nearly 95% of schools force massive physical transitions. Kids literally have to change institutions, sometimes 2 or 3 times, just to finish school. And the data shows us that every single time a student is forced to change campuses, we see a massive spike in dropouts.
Now, compound that logistical nightmare with our legal framework. Article 21A of the Constitution guarantees free and compulsory schooling, sure, but only for ages 6 to 14. So this effectively ends statutory free education exactly after class 8. Right when a teenager's labor becomes super valuable to a struggling family, the sudden shift of education costs onto the household creates an insurmountable barrier.
Now, for the students who do stay, we have to look at the learning deficit, and that means holding 2 competing truths at once. Truth 1 is a bit of good news. Foundational math has slightly recovered post-pandemic. The share of Class 8 students able to solve a basic division problem rose to almost 46% in 2024. But Truth 2 is a decade-long slide in reading. The ability of those exact same Class 8 students to read a simple Class 2 level text has actually fallen from nearly 75% 10 years ago down to 71.1% today. And the PARCC 2024 diagnostics add a whole other layer to this. Recovering to a mediocre baseline just isn't enough anymore. The assessments clearly show that while students can absolutely excel at routine textbook recall, they heavily struggle to apply those same concepts in unfamiliar, real-world contexts. Basically, we're confusing completing a textbook with actual foundational mastery. Alongside these learning gaps, we are witnessing a massive public-to-private shift. The landscape is shifting right beneath our feet. Today, government schools educate less than half of all students in India, 49.2% to be exact. Their share has been sliding steadily, while private, unaided school enrollments have surged to nearly 39% over the last decade. Interestingly enough, the absolute number of government schools actually dropped by nearly a lakh. Now, why is that? It's really a mix of 2 things. On one side, it's deliberate government action, states actively consolidating small, under-enrolled schools for efficiency. But on the other side, as Dr. Mishra points out, it is a genuine market reality. Parents are acting like ruthless economists for their children's futures, actively moving them to private options because they're seeking better learning outcomes.
But fixing this isn't as simple as issuing a national mandate, which brings us to the federal reality. Because of India's constitutional architecture, education sits squarely on the concurrent list. This means both parliament and state legislatures have jurisdiction here. So any major structural change, like foundational learning missions or massive school consolidation, must be heavily negotiated state by state. The central government literally cannot just impose a uniform design across the board.
And this slide brilliantly illustrates why. A one-size-fits-all policy from New Delhi is totally impossible when you look at regional disparities. Delhi and Chandigarh boast a 100% secondary to higher secondary transition rate. Meanwhile, a state like Bihar is struggling with a higher secondary enrollment ratio of just 38.1%. You just can't treat states that are operating on completely different educational spectrums the exact same way.
So how do we bridge this massive gap? Let's talk about re-engineering Viksit Bharat 2047. Take the vision document for Odisha as a perfect example of this. It targets an aggressive, massive leap to a $28,000 per capita income by 2047. But as this whole explainer highlights, an economy of that scale simply cannot be built on a workforce drawn from a school system where fewer than half of Class 8 students can reliably do basic division. State blueprints targeting massive economic growth are essentially placing a huge wager on reversing these exact learning deficits. At the end of the day, income targets and learning targets are the exact same conversation. To solve this, the NITI Aayog roadmap outlines essential structural pivots, not just band-aids. First, consolidate standalone campuses into unbroken grade 1 to 12 models so we can finally stop those transition dropouts. Second, correct where our teachers are actually deployed. Third, use the Parak assessment to verify true mastery, not just whether a kid finished a textbook. And finally, target the equity spending exactly where it's lagging, directing funds towards states like Bihar and Jharkhand.
Because it's no longer about counting the number of schools built, or even how many students walk through the front gates. Ultimately, the success of India's 2047 ambitions rests entirely on one quiet, totally unglamorous question. Will the child who enters Class 1 this year actually still be learning, not merely just enrolled, but learning by the time she reaches Class 12? That is the real test of a developed India. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep questioning what's really happening inside our classrooms.